All right, thank you. We have Doug Lloyd joining us, and Doug is running for Attorney General. And thank you, Doug, for filling out the questionnaire. We look forward to sharing that across the state with all of the precinct delegates and publishing both the questionnaires and these interviews. And let's just start. Can you introduce yourself to all the delegates that will be watching this and just tell us how the Attorney General race is going so far?
Sure. Joel, Jason, thank you very much for having me here. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the delegates listening. Here's what the delegates need to know about me. I've been an attorney for 34 years. For the last 30, I've been a prosecutor. Since 2013, I've been the elected prosecutor in Eaton County, where I've won 4 elections as a Republican in a county that doesn't actually lean our way. For me, when I talk to the delegates, it's just not about making promises. I'm actually bringing conservative leadership, real trial experience, and the ability to actually win. And for me, as I go around the state telling the people, I think it's important. We've managed to get to almost 65 counties, and I just enjoy getting out and actually meeting the delegates, letting them know that there is something out there that we can actually do to make sure that we're bringing Michigan back. We have to nominate candidates who can actually win the election. And I believe by getting in this race that we have the ability to actually win the Attorney General's seat.
That's actually a really great segue into my first question for you. And that is that if you win the nomination on March 28th by the delegates, what will the AG race look like against your Democrat challenger from the 28th all the way up to November?
Sure. Yeah, and that's the thing that's really important when I talk to the delegates that they got to think about. They're not actually thinking about what the Democrats may look like. But I can tell you that those who have announced on the Democrat side so far, you have 2 elected prosecutors, the prosecutor of Oakland County, the prosecutor of Washtenaw County, and a former U.S. attorney under Joe Biden, who also happened to be Gretchen Whitmer's executive counsel during COVID. That's what you're going to face. So if you're going to actually look at an election and being able to beat that side, you better actually know what they're about. And as a prosecutor, I've had that opportunity, good or bad, to actually sit with them publicly. I know what they're going to say, and I know how to combat that as we move forward in this general election.
Thanks. And so on the flip side of that, if you don't win the nomination on March 28th, what will your next steps be politically or privately?
Well, see, I've already got a day job. I'm the Eaton County prosecutor, and that's something I do every day. I was elected by my constituents, just as I've been the last, 4 times, to do my job here in Eaton County. And so for me, it's really important that I keep my constituents safe. And so I go to work every day making sure that, my office is ran to the best of its ability to make sure that we're keeping Eaton County safe. So, whether I receive the nomination or don't receive the nomination, I'm going to still be doing my day job as the elected prosecutor in Eaton County.
Thanks, Doug. Getting into some issues. So first, we'll look a little bit kind of constitutionally at the Second Amendment. So considering cases where Michigan law or even the Michigan Constitution would contradict the U.S. Constitution, for example, you might think of red flag laws or MCL 691-1815 was referenced in the questionnaire. In contrast with the U.S. Constitution's Second Amendment, how would you respond when violations of Michigan law are referred to you, but the reference to Michigan law contradicts the U.S. Constitution?
Well, when I'm looking at that, are you specifically talking about red law? Or are we talking in general? Because I'm looking first, obviously, we have the U.S. Constitution, but we also have the Michigan Constitution, and some of those things within the Michigan Constitution themselves are actually stronger. When we look at the ability here in Michigan to actually carry firearms, our laws actually are more specific than the U.S. Constitution is, as far as that right to bear arms. But there is the actual aspect that the legislature has gone through and actually passed laws. Now, I don't agree with the red flag law. And that's the interesting thing that people talk about, when they talk about prosecutors or they talk about the attorney general. We're not actually one of those people that has the ability to actually enforce red flag. And so I've always made that quite clear that, that's a limited category of people that can actually even apply for that. And then it's got to go in front of a judge. And then you've got to have a judge who actually is willing to say, well, I'm going to step on a person's constitutional rights. And you can see in my questionnaire, there's really, we talk about that in the sense that, I don't agree with the laws that have been put, but they are going through the system as far as being challenged. And for me, I want to see what's happening as far as, who's actually bringing those constitutional challenges and what are they actually asking? Because if they're not asking the right questions, I believe the Attorney General has the responsibility to step in and actually ask those correct questions to the court.
Great. So you mentioned some credible concerns raised by voters about the concern of the 2020 election. Can you cite one or two specific examples that you believe warrant further investigation?
Sure. I mean, there's been several, right? I mean, when I talk to people, there's obviously the concern as far as what happened in Detroit. That's always a big one. And for me, my response always is that it's a two-step thing here that we have to look at, and your delegates, and your county parties are going to be able to actually, look at those Secretary of States. But I break it down into, election integrity and election fraud. If we want election integrity, then we better elect a good, Secretary of State, a good Republican Secretary of State who's actually going to go out and do election integrity. For me, as the Attorney General, it's about election fraud. And that's where the criminal aspects come in. And when we're talking about fraud and we're talking about a criminal case and bringing a person to court, well, then we have to have the facts and evidence. Now, as the Eaton County prosecutor, I haven't been presented with those facts and evidence, but I believe they're out there. And I believe the Attorney General has the ability to actually use their investigative, officers within their office or the Michigan State Police to actually go back and look at those items. And so as I look at it, I want to take those things in. Yeah. And we also have the legislature who's doing some of that work for us, by actually looking as to what happened. And so once you have that facts and evidence, then you can actually prosecute. The last thing we want to be is what our current Attorney General is right now, bringing cases forward that should have never been brought forward and not being able to prove them. I'm a firm believer, if you're going to charge a person with a crime, you better be able to prove it. And so I want those facts and evidence to actually allow me to walk into court and prove to a judge or jury that that person actually committed that crime.
Are there any statute of limitations that we need to be concerned about as a public body?
Unfortunately, there is. There's 6 years. And so when we talk about those things that happen, we're talking about whether it be COVID, and the actions that happened after that, initial 30-day order that was put out there, or we're talking about the elections, we're talking about, November of 2020. So yes, unfortunately, we are running up on those. And people often ask, well, why wasn't anything done? Well, the obvious thing is because we allowed a Democrat Attorney General to actually be hired. And so the question becomes do we want to actually nominate a candidate who can win the general election or just continue to complain? Because if we don't actually nominate a Republican who can win the general election, we're going to be stuck in the same boat that we've been in for the last going on 6 years.
So thanks, Doug. The U.S. Constitution states in Article 1, Section 4, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. I believe you mentioned that under the emergency powers in 2020, the SOS office decided to issue mail-in ballot applications to all registered voters. Given what I just read, Article 1, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution, is there anything that could be done, really both retroactively or proactively by your Attorney General's office to correct election procedures which were altered by the SOS Jocelyn Benson's office without legislative action to back her up?
Sure, and that's where we have to, think about that there is a separation of powers. So you have a separation of powers between the governor, the attorney general, and the secretary of state. None of them can actually look at the other and say, well, I'm going to take over your job. But for the attorney general, what I look at is, when you're making your policy, that's one thing. But when you're going outside of that policy and creating something that violates the law, then the attorney general has the ability to step in. So as I said in my answers, I would look at, does it require an opinion by the attorney general to actually say that, your regulatory actions that you took exceeded the bounds that you were allowed? Was there some violation of criminal statute by you actually doing that? And so looking at that, I'm going to look at that and use the attorney generals within my office to look at those things and determine, was there an action that requires an opinion, or was there something that actually requires some sort of either civil or criminal suit in regards to those regulatory actions that were taken?
So that's kind of segues into another question that I have, and that is, with all the ongoing concerns of corruption in government, federal and especially at our state level, how would you prioritize investigations into public officials, including those of your own party? And maybe you can give us an example of a high-profile case that might involve a conflict of interest, and how you would pursue that, how you'd balance transparency in the process and whatnot.
Well, that's the great thing. I haven't been involved in state party politics. I've been the Eaton County prosecutor. And so my concern has been what has occurred within Eaton County. So I don't have a conflict. So when I look at cases that are sitting in the attorney general's office right now, I have the ability to walk in with my 34 years of experience, as well as my common sense, and actually sit down and look at every one of those cases and make the determination. Because see, here's what we should think about. Your attorney general, your Michigan attorney general, should be Michigan first, then America first, because your job is to protect the sovereignty of Michigan. So I'm going to be looking at the cases within that office and go, are they a benefit to the taxpayers, the citizens of Michigan? If they're not, then why are we involved in those cases? And, when we talk about high profile cases, obviously the low lying fruit is the amount of times that Dana Nessel has sued President Trump. What is the benefit that's being brought to the citizens of our state with those actions? If there is no benefit, then we're wasting taxpayer dollars. And when we talk about that we want smaller government, that means that we're going to have to work with the individuals that are actually employed in that office. Can't go to the legislature and ask for more. And so for me, it would be about realigning the people that are there, have them stop wasting their times on cases that did nothing for the state, and rather go and work on cases that are backlogged in that office and that are causing our citizens to actually hurt as they wait to see what the attorney general will actually do.
Thanks, Doug. Maybe we'll do one or two rapid fire questions here. What opportunities do you see for the Michigan's AG's office in conjunction with law enforcement to put a stop to human trafficking in Michigan?
Yeah, that right there should be happening all the time. There are task forces that can be created. Michigan State Police actually has one of those task forces. They work around the state. You actually need to be bringing in your local prosecutors. A lot of us, such as myself, actually have human trafficking aspects within our counties. One of the last cases I did was actually against our largest township supervisor. He was caught in a juvenile sexting sting and was prosecuted for that. And so that's an easy one where, how that works, if you think about it, and I'm sorry, it's not turning into rapid fire.
That's all right.
Is that the attorney general is the only agency that has the ability to cross county lines. And so I'm able to take an individual who's actually gone to 2 or 3 counties, or a group of individuals, and instead of forcing those 2 or 3 counties to prosecute them individually, the attorney general can take that case and can actually bring it forward in one court. There, you're actually saving the taxpayer monies because your local counties aren't having to prosecute them individually, but you're also able to actually bring heavier charges against that individual for the sex trafficking they're doing.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate that. How would the AG's office pursue legal action against schools that provably are violating parental rights?
Sure, and there's many things that you can look at there. Obviously, schools are their own bodies, just as we look at this, the state education system. That's something that, in reality, your local school districts, when they make recommendations, those are just recommendations. Your local school districts can make the determination as to whether they're going to actually handle those or not handle those. But I'm going to look at it as, are you violating some constitutional right? Because that's one of the most important things that an attorney general should be doing. They should be protecting the constitutional right of all citizens. Excuse me. Those citizens are actually minors too, right? There are kids, and we better be concerned about our kids as far as what's happening. So, as the attorney general, I'm actually going to be looking at, is that local school district doing something that is violating the rights of those children? If they are, then it's the attorney general's responsibility to step in either civilly or criminally, depending on the aspects of how it's handling in that school district, and actually look at stepping in and doing something against that school district.
And what's the best way for parents to submit those types of questions to you? Would you set up a hotline for parents, parental rights, or just how would you do that kind of on the ground level?
Well, for me, I already look at it that, in a sense that you could almost look at that, as a standard complaint, a consumer protection and complaint. Once again, if we're actually creating new things, then we're going to be moving people around. And that means that something else is going to be, handling, we're going to have less people to handle something else because we've created a new unit. I think there's already units there in the Attorney General's office that are there that allow people to actually file formal complaints. So I don't think you need to create anything new. All it would take is actually just a little piece or a tweak on the website to allow parents to actually file their complaints.
Great.
All right. Well, Doug, thank you so much for joining us. And in closing, can you tell the delegates what makes you the best Republican candidate? Maybe some things you haven't already gone over, but the best Republican candidate for Attorney General.
Sure. For me, it's I look at it and look at the track records. Look at what the candidates have actually done. 34 years of experience, 30 years as a prosecutor. You can go all the way back to the 90s and find, cases that I worked on. And I think that's important. If we're going to move forward and you're going to actually nominate a candidate, it's going to have to be a candidate that can actually survive, their opponents in the general election. I've got the experience. I've got the know-how. I've got the leadership experience. I have more leadership experience than anyone else on our side or the Democrat side. And that's going to be important because if you want to bring accountability and integrity back to that office, if you want an actual fighter who understands how to actually do things in a courtroom, as well as how to make sure that, the legislature actually listens and creates good conservative law, then for the delegates, I'm asking for their support. Because I've had the ability to actually appear in front of the legislature over a dozen times. I've had the ability to actually go to the legislature to fight against bad laws and work with the legislature to create good laws for our communities. All of that's going to be important if you're going to be the chief legal officer of this state. And for me, I got into this because I saw at the ground level what is wrong. And I know together that we can bring Michigan back.
All right. Thank you, Doug.
Doug.
Thank you very much for having me tonight.